Today, we're pleased to have Paul Ferguson, CEO of Metals Australia, joining us. Paul, pleasure having you here today. Are you able to give us a bit of a background about yourself and MLS? Thanks.
Yeah, sure, Wei. Thanks for hosting us today, and thanks to all the people who are participating, whether you're in Australia or in Canada for that matter. So yes, I'm Paul Ferguson. I'm the CEO of Metals Australia. I've been with the company since January of 2024. My background, I'm a mining engineer, postgrad in finance as well. I spent most of my working career, over 35 years now, working for the super majors. More of my working career spent offshore than on it throughout different parts of Asia, and of course probably the last sort of 15 years or so in North America, including living in Canada. So I spent a lot of time working on lots of different mineral commodities, but also in the oil and gas sector in commercial spaces. But probably notable for this project is, heavy mining, mineral processing and refining experience in Canada, in cold climate environments. Over 10 years working on a major oil sands project that it was a $30 billion, nearly 10 years of investment by ExxonMobil and Imperial Oil. I've also worked in the industrial minerals space, for one of the world's largest private companies that produces industrial minerals, which is a good insight into the graphite industry as well. So I think I came to work for Metals Australia on the strength of really two things. One, the quality of the asset that we're going to talk about today, which is the Lac Carheil Graphite Project. And two, that a company in the junior space that had the cash backing to be able to do the work that was necessary to hopefully reveal the true value of this asset. It does it in spades. So thank you. Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks, Paul. That's a great introduction. Let's learn more about Metals Australia and the Lac Carheil project.
Yes, so let me share a slide deck, and for many of you, you probably would have seen that this deck that I'm going to share was also put out on the ASX yesterday. So the focus of today is really on Lac Carheil, the graphite project we have in Quebec. It truly is Canada's next fully integrated graphite transformation project. It's a world-class project. It's really just starting to emerge on radars, and I know that to be true because I'm getting lots of pings from those radars at the moment. So that's really good. So I'll try and get through these slides in 15 or so minutes, because I think there's quite a few questions, and Way's going to do his job to try and keep me on track. Sometimes it's hard to slow me down talking about this project. Disclaimer, look, this is an important slide. I recommend that its contents be read in the interest of time, though we'll move on. A call out to Chris Ramsey, our CP, who does an amazing amount of work for us in relation to this project. So Metals Australia, brief intro. I would classify Metals Australia as a project development company focused on two of the world's premier mining countries, and that was a real appeal to me. It's hard enough to build projects, but you really want to be able to build those quality projects in jurisdictions of low sovereign risk. So I would say, just going back in the slide there, we just got ahead. I would say that from our perspective, our focus is on those two jurisdictions. We certainly have a proven record of discovery, and we'll talk about that. And we also have a very strong board that is focused on seeing these projects through development. We're a preferred partner. We work closely with all the stakeholders, and I think most of the groups we're working with across Canada have really come to understand us and engage with us in a very positive way. Our project portfolio, so quick snapshot of what we've got. In terms of the core projects, we not only have Lac Carheil, which is going to be the focus of the discussion this morning. Also in Canada, we have really 4 gold prospects in the gold and base metal prospects in the James Bay region, Quebec. Those are very interesting, but much earlier stage. And back in Australia, our jurisdictions are Northern Territory and Western Australia. In WA, we've got an exciting vanadium titanium magnetite discovery that sits right beside some shallow zinc copper silver resources in the Murchison region, all on granted mining leases, and we're making some good moves on that project. So I think that's a genuine second project earlier in the pipeline for us. Warrego East in the Northern Territory is west of Tennant Creek. Our tenements are just 5 kilometres east of the old Warrego mine that people might remember, that produced nearly 5 million tonnes at around 2% copper and 8 grams a tonne gold right up into the late 1980s. So today that would be an enormous find. And prospectivity in the Tennant Creek area is rising as well. So we've seen some of the transactions go through there. So we're looking forward to some of the work ahead of us in that regard as well. So kind of keep to those sort of 4 projects. But today is all about Carheil.
Awesome. Hey, Paul, before you go on,
yeah,
your Zoom control panel, I think it's on top of this screen. You might want to just drag it out of the way.
How's that?
Yeah, maybe just drag it to the other screen. It might. That's perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. Yes. Okay, good. Well, moving on. So the Quebec Graphite Project really consists of 2 projects that are aimed at delivering an end-to-end fully integrated solution to produce high purity products from multiple markets. And I'll note at this stage, I do cover in slide 14 in the backup, in the interest of time, the sort of why a high-grade graphite project in Canada matters. Suffice to say that graphite is really a critical mineral. Its use, its probably major thematic, is in the anode side of all lithium-ion batteries, and as the evolution continues in relation to the transition to clean energy solutions, its use will only further increase in demand, and there's plenty of good forecasts out there that you can see. But turning to the 2 projects to support that, I firstly look at the left-hand side here, which is the location of our Upstream project, which is the mine and black graphite concentrate plant. It's situated in iron ore heartland country of Quebec. So Fermont is approximately in the middle of the picture. That's the closest township to us. Our claims, and I'll talk about these in more detail, are what's in high res that you can see there. But the other features around of this slide are the mines and mining communities off to the north and the northeast of us. So there's a vast array of infrastructure supporting us. The high voltage power line for Quebec Hydro, low cost power, runs directly through our project. It couldn't get much closer. And the new highway 389 rerouting that comes up from Baie-Comeau, which you can also see in the right-hand side picture, that new highway is actually being rerouted, and the reroute alignment, which is shown as a green and white dashed line, runs connecting through our claims area up to Fermont. So access onto that new highway, which will be built and fully opened by the end of 2028, provides us with enviable infrastructure up at the site. We'll talk about the project in that Fermont region shortly. But just in terms of the second project, which is the Downstream project, which people will be aware of, we published a preliminary economic assessment on back on the 28th of April. That project is situated in Baie-Comeau, which is on the north side of the St. Lawrence River. And you can see we show the 2 positions of the Lac Carheil project and the battery anode material project, Baie-Comeau, connected by a 389 highway, which we mentioned, around about 560. It shows 589 as the full distance to Fermont, but probably around 560 kilometres on what is going to be class highway by the time it's needed for us. And our project would truck our concentrate down that highway, around about 10 trucks a day. Let's turn to the Upstream project, which is the mine and processing plant. But perhaps before I talk about the mine and the processing plant in detail, you can certainly see the mine cut away there at the bottom right of this chart. I just want to talk about the world-class asset or mineral endowment that underpins this project. And again, just for reference, you can see Fermont positioned in the top portion of this slide, and the top portion of this image, I should say. And everything in high resolution is our claims. There's a bar on the left-hand side that shows the in excess of 31 kilometres that we hold north to south. And it's approximately the same east to west as well. All the action is really shown in the middle. There's a lot of busy work going on there. Pink and purple are all the different graphite trends. So far, we've identified 10 graphite trends that span a collective 36 kilometres of strike length for this project. And you can see there some of these trends have all been sampled, and you can see the grades there, that many of them in excess of 20% in terms of total graphitic carbon. What's of interest here for us is that rectangle approximately just below the middle of this picture. There's a gold text box there, if you want, that is pointing into that very small rectangle, and that is the area of our current resource. And look, it's 50 million tonnes, 5.1 million tonnes of contained graphite. We'll put that into perspective shortly, but suffice to say, that resource represents just a couple of kilometres of the 36 that we've mapped out. So this potential here to grow and expand and further explore some of those areas that we've added in a couple of extra plane tranches across 2024 and into 2025 present very well for the enormity of the scale potential of this future project.
So Paul, like just in terms of like that reserve that you mentioned, can you just frame that into context for us as to, what it means to have that 5.1 million tonnes? And
yeah, so the 5.1 million tonnes, and maybe I'll do it on this, because on this next slide, I refer to the open cut. And the open cut, the initial open cut that's in our mine plan, is based on drilling of just 2.3 kilometres of that 36 kilometres of trends that we have mapped out on just one of 10. So those 2 kilometres generated around the 5.1 million tonnes of contained graphite. And to put that into perspective, we will consume about 0.1 million tonnes of that a year. So roughly about 51 years mapped out in just that first 2 kilometres. So if 2 kilometres of those graphite trends generates 51 years of potential production, then 36 kilometres, I mean, you can do your own maths, but it's many multiples of 51 years. It's potentially centuries of supply there. And look, why that matters, I think, from my perspective, looking for world-class projects, is scalability. We start a relatively small sense to produce 100,000 tonnes of flake graphite concentrate per year, but we now have a resource and an endowment in this region that could easily support 200,000 or 300,000 tonnes a year. I often joke to people, if 36 kilometres could potentially give us 900 years, which is what the extrapolation would be for 100,000 tonnes a year, then we'd only be able to do 200,000 for 450 years. So that just gives you some perspective over what we're talking about. Look,
Paul, sorry, just before you go on, in terms of that 100,000 per year right now, is that current demand or is that future demand? Because I imagine there's a lot more EV penetration coming through in the future.
Yeah, exactly right. That's current demand. So, Canada has a critical and strategic mineral plan that has called for sort of 5 graphite mines to be in operation and 5 coated spherical graphite refineries by 2040. Currently, Canada has no operational graphite mines. It had one very small one that's in care and maintenance, this is based on IEA forecasts. So, we're quite comfortable that the demand is there for 100,000, the time we're talking about producing, and certainly our potential capacity to grow is enormous, underpinned by that massive strategic resource and those trends that we've seen. So The PFS really consists of the Upstream project, and as we've said, that's due for publication late Q2, so that'll be in the June timeframe. And as I mentioned, that early mine is just from drilling on 2 kilometres, but the first part of that mine is actually even on less than that. It's only planned around the indicated level of the resource, and I know we're talking nuance here, but the indicated portion is the more refined drilling definition of the resource that can be taken and converted into reserves, and we'll publish those maiden reserves for our project in due course in June. But suffice to say, that's about 2.8 million tonnes of indicated resource that will underpin that plan. Turning to the flake graphite concentrate plant, 860,000 tonne per annum capacity, and give you some context on that sizing later. The plan is that we will take our graphite ore, which is on an indicated sense over 11% total graphitic carbon, and we'll upgrade that into concentrate products that are then greater than 95% carbon purity. About 1/4 of our 100,000 tonnes a year of production will then be marketed into markets for medium and coarse flake, mostly in industrial markets. About 75%, or 75,000 tonnes per year, is fine flake, and that is feedstock into the battery anode material refinery that we've published as well. So all on track to deliver the PFS by mid-year. And the one thing I will say is I think we've also been relatively conservative to other Canadian comparators. For example, our flake graphite concentrate plant average over our forecast period from 2029 to 2050 averages $1,385 a tonne. And just the context that the Canadian federal government recently announced a floor price of $1,500 to support the Nouveau Monde Graphite Project, the first 30,000 tonnes of their production for the first 7 years. So you can see we're even conservative in our price estimates relative to the floor price set in Canada.
Is that floor price just for Nouveau Monde, or does that apply for all graphite producers?
Yeah, that's just for Nouveau Monde, but that's the incentive that's been created to start the industry in Canada.
Yeah.
Turning now to the Downstream project, as I won't spend too much time on this because we published a pretty comprehensive preliminary economic assessment for this back at the end of April. This plan consists of a battery anode material refinery located near Baie-Comeau, as we've already shown you where that is. And that refinery will transform around 75,000 tonnes, that fine flake graphite we just mentioned, into around 51,000 tonnes of battery anode material products per year. Ours is a modular approach. We will start with 3 modules that will be sequenced in with full nameplate capacity in year 5. Each of those is 25,000 tonnes per year. And what that allows us to do is scale, so we can add a 4th module or a 5th module as demand dictates. The initial project will be driven by just those indicated resources up at the site. But again, this refinery, the expectation is that this will go on for a lot longer than 25 years in subsequent iterations of this study. Just post-tax, I think this is a good point. Post-tax NPV, net present value after tax, on an 8% discount, generated economics of 1.98 billion. So let's just say 2 billion Australian dollars, which is enormous for a company of our size, frankly. 2 billion Australian dollars, based on our shares on issue today, would be the equivalent of about $2.70 per share, just to give you some perspective. Some really good internal rates of return. And the other thing I'd say here that's important about this project is I think it's great for the community of Baie-Comeau. Baie-Comeau has been a pulp and paper mill city, where the pulp and paper mill basically closed in the early 2020s with COVID. So bringing projects into Baie-Comeau are hugely important. Great infrastructure there that we intend to add 227 full-time jobs, and live local, play local, and use local business. So I think it's a good story. And just one final comment there. even the economics that we've used relative to other projects such as Nouveau Monde Graphite Project, our CSPG price or coated spherical graphite, our weighted average price for our project is around 12% lower than what's used in the economic development of that project. And that's a good place to turn next, which is, when you've got a project that's already ahead of you, and in this case, we can talk really quite confidently about how we compare with Nouveau Monde, since Nouveau Monde, for those that have been reading the press, passed FID just at the end of last week, and Prime Minister Mark Carney was on the ground on that project on Tuesday, officially opening the project. That project is away and running, well supported by great capital input from a variety of different sources. I think this company raised $633 million just in the last couple of months to get this project into fruition. And so that's great for us. We pass on our congratulations to the Nouveau Monde team, and we see them as an inspiration in how we can move our project along as well. And to that end, I think I would say if your project stacks up well relative to one that's going ahead, that's a good place to be. And ours does. I mean, I've just got some points here. The yellow sort of highlights of the Nouveau Monde number that I'll reference. The green is the number that is for the Lac Carheil project, and orange highlighted numbers and the numbers that will reveal themselves when we publish our pre-feasibility study. Just to turn to the second green highlighted number there, that 11.3%, that compares to the Nouveau Monde indicated resource average grade. So what I'm talking about is carbon grade in the ground. And already at that point of comparison, our indicated resource grade is 2.65 times higher than Nouveau Monde's indicated resource. So we obviously haven't published our reserves, so we can't say that. Their reserve grade is essentially the same as their indicated resource. So already we know we have a great advantage. Compared to plant size, when we look at what that means, that translates very well into a lower production capacity requirement. Our plant is 860,000 tonnes per year. Our flake graphite concentrate and process plant to produce 100,000 tonnes a year of flake graphite concentrate products. Nouveau Monde needs to build a 2.56 million tonne size plant to produce not a whole lot more than we are. You'll see those numbers stack up side by side in the chart. We both have an initial project life of 25 years, although as I've shown you in those claims holdings that we hold to the south of Fermont, we can go on for centuries potentially if the demand is there. Next feature I'd like to mention is the anode material. So this is really the high value material that you produce from the flake graphite concentrate. We will produce 51,000 tonnes per year. Nouveau Monde will produce around 44,000 tonnes per year. So, 7,000 tonnes may not seem like much, but when you consider this is the $9,000, $10,000, $11,000, $12,000 a tonne high value product that is actually going into battery packs, that is a significant incremental revenue stream for one project versus the next. And that plays out in the next couple of numbers where Nouveau Monde's entire project, which is mentioned there, has a net present value after tax 8% at $1.05 billion. Already our Downstream project alone is a $1.4 billion, or nearly 33% more. So the takeaways from this pretty busy chart is we have great advantage that will drive a lower capex profile because we need to build a much smaller plant. We produce similar annual concentrate production profile, but we will produce more high value BAM production per tonne of input. We have a similar initial project life, but our upside is enormous. And finally, we're already a high value project and we haven't declared the pre-feasibility. Now, one point of, yes.
Oh, so is Nouveau Monde ahead of MLS in terms of the timeline, or like what
Yes.
do you think it is? Because
that's right. So Nouveau Monde's project I mentioned. So Nouveau Monde last week announced the financial investment decision to go ahead with their project. Their project is a great lookalike to ours. It consists of the Mattawinnie mine north of sort of Montreal and a a battery anode material facility or refinery in Baie-Comeau in Quebec. And so that project went through FID, formally announced FID at the end of last week, and was formally started. Commencement of construction occurred this last Tuesday with Prime Minister Mark Carney on the ground, formally opening that project. So they're ahead of us. They're ahead of us by a couple of years for sure. But what I'm saying is when you look at our project relative to that project, and if that project attracted all of the capital and is now into construction effectively, and I mentioned earlier that the Canadian Critical and Strategic Mineral Plan outlines a need for 5 graphite mines and 5 coated spherical graphite refineries to be in place by 2040. Yeah, I'm happy for us to be number 2.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I mean, just on a relative basis, they're capped at around what, 600 mil, and then you guys are
I think that's right. Exactly. That's a great point. We market cap for them, it's probably around 500 million Canadian. They've been up over $1 billion, and where are we? So I don't need to tell our shareholders. So just like this really final slide, and we can talk on, and as usual, I'll probably run on longer than I intended, but the next steps really here are complete our pre-feasibility study for the Upstream project. That's on track. In fact, I'm in Canada I'm heading to Canada tomorrow for the next couple of weeks, and a lot of that is around the study integration, port integration, economic modelling. It's bringing all that together. It's well advanced. And then I'd say the next 2 are really, I'll call them just commitments. Our board has approved the commencement of what I call the critical path activities around the metallurgical test work that's now needed to take what will be our new reserve model in through metallurgical test work to design the flow sheet for the feasibility study level of our flake graphite concentrate plant. Outcome of that will also be to produce very large sample of that concentrate, to send that to Germany, which will be the kickoff of the feasibility study level work on our downstream refinery, which I've said in previous publications that we're advancing straight to feasibility study level. Also, the critical path activities related to the environmental studies are approved by our board. So we'll be on the ground there with Nordistello this summer and this fall, gathering all manner of activities, flora, fauna, water studies. And we've been working on stakeholder engagement studies now for the best part of 2 years. So these are activities which I'll say are critical path to maintain this on schedule. When the PFS is out, there'll be a lot more marketing of this project, and we really position this as Canada's next fully integrated graphite transformation project in Quebec. So I'm saying Nouveau Monde's clearly first, and we're the next. To do that, we recognise we need to establish a business presence in Quebec. The Quebec government and all the stakeholders we've been dealing with have been first class, have been nothing but helpful in terms of their assistance to our progress on the study work that we've been done. But to really get after this with the horsepower that's required when we're working on feasibility study level work programs, we need to be there. So we'll be looking at a regional business office in Quebec, possibly in Baie-Comeau. And then finally, we really want to stay on track to the environmental and social impact assessment, which is ultimately the key piece of work that will be submitted for this project's approval. So, key takeaway there is we're not just doing these studies and stalling, we're actually working on the active next steps on this critical path to keep this project going. And with that, I will sort of yield back. We can potentially talk about any questions.
Perfect. Thanks, Paul. Great presentation. I do have a few questions. So the first one is the Canadian and provincial governments around there. Can you talk a bit about what they're doing to support the development of the graphite projects in Canada?
Yeah, honestly, it's fantastic, the level of support from the federal government of Canada and the provincial government. And we've seen that firsthand at a provincial level with the Quebec Ministry of Natural Resources and Forests awarding us a a $600,000 grant, which is helping us right now with our metallurgical test work. And that's one of the most obvious things. But when you look at it from a federal government perspective, mineral exploration tax credit process is great in terms of cashback rebates that we're able to attract back for exploration work and preliminary economic assessments at the federal level. The Quebec government is even more supportive, I would say, in terms of the breadth of their definition around some of the studies that you can claim. And so you can get up to sort of 45 cents back in the dollar for the study work that is being undertaken in Canada on these kinds of projects. And that's enormous, when you're a pre-revenue company and, you're shipping a lot of money out the door. To be able to get some of that back is significant. I think it really speaks to how committed Canada is to get after the development of its projects. And another one, so that's kind of like the exploration and study side. But I referenced this when we published our Downstream refinery report, the critical mineral or the clean manufacturing technology investment tax credit regime that is in place to support the construction of clean manufacturing technology processing equipment in Canada with another 30% effective cash back rebate on capital spend. So, I think in our refinery model, when I talked about the $884 million of capex that would be, required to build that, albeit with some pretty significant contingencies, there's about $260 million that will be returned through the clean manufacturing technology ITC or investment tax credit. So that's it. That's enormous. There's lots of other things besides that. We saw that play out with Nouveau Monde, whether it was Economic Development Corporation of Canada, Infrastructure Bank, at the provincial level, Investment Quebec, that all jumped on board to help fund Nouveau Monde's project. And most of those are aware of our project too. We're just at an earlier stage. So as our project develops maturity and we keep demonstrating our commitment to this project, I think we'll start to see
understood. Yeah. No, it does sound like there is quite a lot of support coming through from different levels of government, or upstream and downstream. So, and just in terms of like some of the MPV that you were talking about before, is that factored into the valuations or is that on top of?
So from I think the one thing we've declared is, NPV after tax 8% basis for just our downstream project at, nearly 2 billion Australian dollars. And I don't think there's any valuation that I've seen that comes close to that. We have had some recent due diligence report work done on us, literally in the last week or so.
Yeah.
That sort of places valuations at just single-digit percents of that for us. So I don't think that's coming through at the moment.
No, okay, understood. And let's move on to the PFS. So that's the pre-feasibility study?
That's right, yep.
So is that all on track for mid-year this year? And can you talk about what's left to do for it?
Yes, it's all on track. I'd say, we're into sort of report reviews and, for people that have done this thing, there's a whole bunch of chapters that sort of prepared from different, study discipline areas that sort of get combined and integrated in these reports, and of course, CapEx and OpEx models and the economic analysis. And so all of that is kind of very well advanced. A lot of it's at finished level and it's now in integration. I will be in Toronto next week, spending time with our kind of lead study manager, which is Lycopodium Minerals Canada, and also DRA Americas, who've had the sort of the mining scope for us, and a bit of others beside, but they're kind of the two major contributors of the work effort here. So, but suffice to say, we're in review phase already, and a lot of the report chapters are read. So probably just come down to me at the end of the day in terms of, being able to sort of pull all this together and, try to hear its story. I'll have some good help, of course, but I definitely see that being on track for late June.
Excellent. And you mentioned before Nouveau Monde, they had their FID, so that's the final investment decision.
Yes.
Last week.
Yes.
So what's the read through for MLS?
Well, the read-through is speaking of hope. For a long time, and the graphite industry it's been sort of negative news and going sideways. And I'm sure a lot of Australian investors would see that back here in Australia as well. But I think what we have seen is a really committed, very intentional move on the part of the Canadian government to underpin the development of its own critical minerals industry, understanding it needs to be the master of its own destiny and supply in that regard. And so I think, Nouveau Monde positioned themselves exceptionally well. They've been at this for, 10 years, a lot longer than we have on this particular project. But, by being there and being ready, having a shovel-ready project, they're now reaping the reward for that effort. We need to get to that place. And I don't see Nouveau Monde as a competitor. I actually see them as a bit of many respects, blazing the pathway for us. And because there's a lot of need. As I said, five mines and 5 coated spherical graphite plants for North American demand. And of course, Quebec, if you look at it on the map, couldn't be better situated. It's a short sail across the Atlantic Ocean to Europe, and Europe is really looking for that steady, reliable supply from a credible partner.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a good policy leading indicator for yourselves, I think.
Mm.
A few other questions, maybe not too company specific, but on the industry overall. So natural versus synthetic graphite. Can you just talk a bit about the pros and cons, why natural is required and what synthetic means?
Yeah, so so synthetic is largely a very energy intensive byproduct from oil and gas processing. And, I worked for an oil and gas company, for over 20 years in processing. So I kind of understand that the energy intensity of producing that byproduct. And obviously there's a lot of carbon produced, when you're processing heavy crude oils in particular. So it requires an ongoing oil and gas industry. And I would argue that we're seeing the early signs of shift away from oil and gas and a steady acceleration into clean energy solutions. So, oil and gas is going to be around for decades to come. Don't misunderstand me, but we are seeing a very significant acceleration of the take-up of EVs and battery energy storage solutions, etc., that will consume graphite. And so in that respect, if oil and gas demand is declining over time, then natural graphite will be a kind of a replacement. It's also in cheap, plentiful supply in strategically safe jurisdictions like Canada. Canada has a lot of it. So I think you'll see that the demand for natural graphite continue to rise. And, all the forecasts that are out there are showing that. Certainly over the next 2 years.
That definitely makes a lot of sense. It's a bit of a curly one. And just in terms of policy and Trump, do you have any thoughts around that?
I mean, it's helping us, right? The disruption, whether it's been in terms of tariffs, relationships between formerly steady partners, obviously the Middle East war at the moment and what that's doing to fuel and oil prices and will do for a long time to come, given the structural destruction that's occurred in that zone already. So I think if anything, all I'll say is I think what it's done is it's created a Canada under Prime Minister Mark Carney that has been much more intentional about developing strategic supply resources of critical minerals. Canada is in a great situation. It's probably why, the US oftentimes wants to take Canada, right? Because I think Canada is such a resource-rich country. So, for whatever's going on in the US, I think all I can see from that is much more intentional, much more committed effort to get after the development of these projects in Canada.
Yeah.
And honestly, at the moment, in respect of fuel and oil prices, many people in that, we've all seen the tipping point curve, right? And I'd place myself in the early majority on the left-hand side of the curve before it tips over. But I'd say what we're seeing at the moment is an acceleration in the early majority taking up, EVs, taking up battery energy storage solutions, solar. You can see that happening in Australia.
Yeah, no, I've got my own EV too.
Just
So
an anecdote, the sale of secondhand EVs in April alone in Australia doubled from March to April. So it tells you people are voting with their wallet.
No, it makes sense. And just in terms of some of this policy stuff too, I think it's really about countering the Chinese dominance in the supply chain too, isn't it? I mean,
yes, that's right. I mean, look, China's done this exceptionally well, right? Like, I mean, they 95% or more of high purity graphite anode products today are produced either in China or by Chinese companies. Some of the best battery manufacturers in the world are Chinese, and certainly for anyone that's been in and driven, seeing some of the Chinese EV product, it's fantastic, for the price point. So it's exceptionally hard to kind of break into that market when it's been so well put together effectively and so well controlled, I would say, by China. And so that's why I think countries like Canada have to be very deliberate about providing support to the critical mineral companies to get that supply chain built in their own domestic backyard, frankly, because we can see when so much of the control is being managed by China, then we're all exposed to the susceptibility of that single supply chain at the moment.
great. Well, we've got a question on the line, so I've just provided the permissions. Anthony, if you'd like to go ahead.
Hi, Paul. It's Anthony Han. I just had a couple of questions. One is, you've got huge projected demand for battery anode materials going forward. So what do you see in terms of supply versus demand? And is the market in deficit currently? And then the other question I had is, assuming that you have a positive PFS, what's the timing as far as moving from the PFS through to a FEED and then through to FID? I mean, I guess what's the timing there? Is it years out, or is it sort of a couple of dozen months?
Yeah, well, the answer, is we're on an aggressive timeline. I'd like to see us, constructing these projects in, sort of 2029 and be producing in 2030. And that's consistent with what we said in the PEA for the Downstream project. And there's some real reasons for that. There's some great incentives that the Canadian government is providing. I talked about the clean manufacturing technology investment tax credits that really support projects being accelerated through to the end of 2031. And those things don't drop off a cliff at the end of 31. They keep going. But so therefore, that's the timeline we're on. And so we need to talk about, what demand outlook is in 2030 and 2031, not necessarily in 2026. And I'd say 2026, it's been a bit balanced. Obviously, we haven't seen a lot of growth in graphite prices, but we also haven't seen a whole lot of movement going on in terms of graphite production development either. Certainly in Canada or in North America, I can point to Nouveau Monde. That's about it in terms of a project started. So, as we see battery energy storage solutions start to really take up, and they are, the whole aspect of AI data centers and the energy demand for those is already driving, quite significant changes in the demand outlook for anode material and battery materials generally. And I would say we're seeing an acceleration. There's a structural change that's already certainly occurring over the last couple of months, and it won't alter. There's a structural change occurring for the take up again of EVs. So we'll see that accelerate. So I think by the time we're talking about, our production outlook at 51,000 tonnes of production, and again, that's 2030, 2031, sort of year 5, I think we said we were lined out in terms of nameplate capacity. in that at that time, I would imagine there's people asking us, so when are you going to build the 4th module and the 5th module? And we can do it. So I think all the vectors are pointing in the right direction for the underpinning of future demand for graphite and anode material.
And as I understand it, there's no alternative. There always will be a use for graphite or in anodes.
Well, that's right. I mean, if you look at lithium-ion batteries today, and I mean, we could delve into battery chemistry, but you're probably better off having a whole separate forum with battery chemistry experts. Yeah. But I sort of know what I know, but I also know I don't know everything. But if you look at lithium-ion today, and there's a lot of talk on the cathode side, which is a positive side of the battery, and whether it's lithium and nickel and cobalt and all those sort of other things, that it's always being dull and boring carbon on the other side, right? And so, and the carbon is supplied by high purity graphite, and even in some of the emerging battery chemistries, utilizing sodium, it's still carbon on the other side, and it might be different formations of carbon, and some different things need to occur to that carbon, but it's still carbon on the other side. So. Yeah, the chemistry is for a long time, been focused on those kind of critical minerals that are on the other side, on the positive side. And that's, in large part, I think, because on one hand, it seems like the world has a lot of lithium, but on the other hand, if we keep using it in all these batteries, we'll run out, right? And people haven't necessarily drawn a whole lot of attention necessary to the carbon side, because the view has always been, well, we've got lots of it. The problem being is it's the upgrading of that is all going on in China. It's not going on anywhere else. So I think we're with the structural change that we're seeing, where governments are now really alert and aware to the need to control their own supply chains, that these things are going to develop, in our case in Canada.
Great, thank you.
Thank
we're
you.
running low on time,
Thanks,
so maybe just the last couple of questions. The first one is just in terms of the cash balance in the bank at this point in time.
Yes, yeah.
How your quarterly spending's going?
Yep. So the cash balance in the bank, we put that out in the quarterly report end of April. So at the end of March, we had 4.4 million. And the one thing I've said in there in that report was that I mentioned some of these tax credits that come back as rebates, and so a lot of the spend that we have had in recent times has been spend in Canada on Canadian studies or Canadian exploration, and so there are tax returns that will come back in and replenish us. That's one thing. The other thing I'd say is that the big spend to get this kind of valuation for both the Upstream and the Downstream project has occurred. The biggest part of that spend was the drilling of the project. When we drilled out those 2 kilometres and got a resource, and effectively increased our tonnes in the ground by over 3 times. That took a good input of cash to do that, but that's done. And the PEA, it's published, that's fully costed, fully spent. The pre-feasibility, we're in the final phases of that work. So there's nothing in our horizon that we can't manage. We've got a good cash flow projections over the next 12 months, to do what we need to do. So we're in a good shape. And I think you'll start to see the cash rates go down, and some inputs come back in from tax returns.
Great. Okay. We've just got one more question from Anthony again.
Yep.
Anthony, you want to go ahead?
Hi again, Anthony. You're on mute, Anthony. There we go.
There we go. Now I shouldn't be. When do you, I guess as part of the whole process too, that you're likely to have interested parties sign offtake agreements. I guess if I ask what needs to be done or seen for those to really start to generate interest and potentially sign that first offtake agreement?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I personally had never thought that there'd be a lot of interest in our project until we had the pre-feasibility study level done. A lot of even government affiliated investment, groups, that's a sort of threshold for them. I think they, it's probably plenty of people that publish a scoping study or a PEA and then, don't go on to do anything else. So they, so a lot of these groups are looking for very committed efforts to keep these projects moving. So they want to see that you're committed before they get committed. And pre-feasibility studies is usually minimum hurdle, but that doesn't say that there aren't people watching. We're on the watch list. Maybe that watch list is growing at the moment. And, I mean, I kind of look at it and go, if you go back to the example we've shared as a great news story for the graphite industry generally being the Nouveau Monde experience. Nouveau Monde had its feasibility study published before it signed up with Panasonic Holdings and back in the day, General Motors. Obviously, we know General Motors didn't go through with them, but others have. But they were at FS level. Again, for every one of these projects that's connected by one strategic partner, there's other strategic partners out there looking. And I'd say there's more strategic partners out there looking at the moment because of this whole reliability aspect and, in terms of the supply chain, controlling your own destiny. So the interest is there, but I would say that's the threshold. Oh, you're on mute now.
Apologies for that.
That's all right.
I was going to say we should probably end it there, but that was a really great and informative webinar. So thank you, Paul.
Yeah.
Thanks for taking all the time.
Thanks for everyone for attending. Hopefully you learn a little bit about Metals Australia and our exciting projects and see value in that.
Perfect. Thank you everyone for joining.
Take care.
Bye.
Have a nice day.